Hello and welcome to Midday Report here on TVP World. I'm your host, Marie Cato. Donald Trump says that for now, he doesn't intend to provide Ukraine with long-range Tomahawk missiles to use against Russia. The U.S. president later said one of the challenges he faces with pushing President Putin towards peace talks is that the United States has limited trade with Russia, making tariffs a less effective negotiation tool. It comes as Russia has unleashed another wave of strikes on Ukraine.
Emergency crews search for survivors in the Sumy region, where at least one person was killed and 7 others injured, including 2 children, in an early Monday strike. And firefighters battle flames engulfing a supermarket in the southern city of Mykolaiv. Meanwhile, Kyiv's hopes of taking the fight to Russian military sites behind the front lines with long-range Tomahawk missiles received a blow from Donald Trump.
Ukraine with long-range Tomahawk missiles? Is that something that you're not considering that?
No, not really. Could happen, I could change, but at this moment I'm not.
Trump also on Sunday spoke to CBS News' 60 Minutes program about the difficulty of using trade tariffs to coerce the Kremlin to peace talks over Ukraine.
Why isn't that working with Putin?
It is working with Putin, I think. I did different with him because we don't do very much business with Russia, for one thing. You know, he's not like somebody that buys a lot from us because of foolishness. And I think he'd like to be. I think he wants to come in and he wants to trade with us and he wants to make a lot of money for Russia, and I think that's great.
In Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky revealed that the country had taken delivery of new Patriot air defense systems from Germany, and talks were continuing to further strengthen its defenses.
There will be meetings about this next week, and we have presented to our partners all the calculations, all possible options for how to provide sufficiently reliable air defense.
There are warnings from experts, though, that as Ukraine boosts its defences, Russia's army keeps learning, adapting and changing its priorities in the conflict.
What we're seeing the Russians do over and over again is shift resources to where they're most needed. And that's not surprising. That's what armed forces do. Ukraine does that too. You have to shift resources, whether man or equipment, to where they are most needed. But clearly with this, Russia is showing that this is the priority for Russia at this moment.
As the Kremlin continues raging its war of terror, there's no let-up in sight for Ukrainians.
CIA Director John Ratcliffe met with EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas on Tuesday last week, an EU official confirmed to TVP World. According to media reports, the dialogue centred on threats posed by Russia and China to transatlantic security and comes as questions swirl over America's future military footprint in Europe. Our EU correspondent Angela Skujins has all the details.
An EU source has confirmed to TVP World that CIA Director John Ratcliffe met with the EU's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, on Tuesday last week. While this individual could not disclose the thrust of the conversation, Politico, that media organisation, is reporting quotes from the CIA stating that the dialogue centred on threats emanating from Europe's east, such as Russia and China, that pose threats to the transatlantic security architecture. Now, Mr. Ratcliffe also held meetings with the North Atlantic Council. This is the official decision-making body of the NATO military alliance, also headquartered in Brussels. While this visit from a Washington official is run-of-the-mill, it is even rarer that it being Ratcliffe in particular. TVP World will go to the European Commission to ask for confirmation what exactly was spoken about, but many critics here in the Belgian capital expect it to be an allaying of fears from the United States to Europe, that despite those troops being withdrawn from Europe's eastern flank, the United States will show up and will defend Europe if it needs to. On Wednesday last week, the Romanian Defence Ministry confirmed that allies had confirmed to that Defence Ministry that the United States would not redeploy roughly 700 troops, Romania being one of a dozen countries in Europe experiencing hybrid warfare, such as Poland. We're talking about drone incursions to weaponised migration. Late last week, also those balloons entering Lithuanian airspace, closing down airports. At a time when Europe is only bolstering its defensive architecture, it should come as a slight concern that the United States is withdrawing. However, US Secretary for Defense Pete Hegseth has told CBS, that news organization in the United States, that the repositioning of these troops should be seen as a good sign for Europe, that it is meeting its defense needs, as exemplified by the scaling up of the NATO military alliance spending target from 2% to 5%. Angela Skujins from Brussels for TVP World.
Tensions in Serbia are growing again after peaceful demonstrations commemorating the first anniversary of the Novi Sad disaster. Unrest in Belgrade followed the next day. The country's president, Aleksandar Vučić, says he is ready to call early elections, but that doesn't seem to have appeased the anti-government protesters. Our Balkans correspondent is in Belgrade. Good afternoon, Pavel. Why did President Vučić's address fail to satisfy the protesters?
Well, Marie, I think this is because now, after a year of protests, there is very little trust in the words of President Vučić among the members of the opposition movement. This became evident to me when I talked to some of the protesters in front of the parliament in Belgrade. Please listen.
He didn't prove himself to be trustworthy, at all.
I think he proved too many times that he's not to be trusted.
He couldn't ever be trusted. No, not so. I don't trust him. If he says that if he says good morning, then I go to sleep.
And this distrust, when he says he will call for snap elections, comes at least from two reasons. The first one is the fact that President Vučić has been floating the idea of snap elections before, so now he only reiterates what he had said before without giving a specific date. The second reason is the fact that Vučić's conciliatory words are not backed by his actions. Yesterday, during the unrest in front of the parliament, 37 people were detained. More opposition is expected to gather there today. Marie, back to you.
Pavel Trzaskowski, our Balkans correspondent, reporting from Belgrade. Thanks very much. Poles are no longer enthusiastic about the prospect of reinstating mandatory military service, according to a new opinion poll. This marks a shift in the Polish society's attitude, as just 6 months ago, over 50% of Poles were in favor of bringing back mandatory conscription.
A survey conducted by Poland's IBRIS research agency shows that only 39.2% of Poles approve of reinstating compulsory military service in the country. 45.5% oppose this solution, and 15.2% have no opinion on the matter. For comparison, a previous survey in March showed that 55% of respondents were willing to accept the reinstatement of mandatory military service in Poland. While the Polish Ministry of Defense is not currently working on reinstating conscription, the concept of mass training for volunteers is in the works. Germany is preparing similar plans, expecting to increase the size of its army from 180,000 to 260,000 through voluntary service by the early 2030s.
In the Czech Republic, a new government coalition comes into being today. Andrej Babiš's ANO party has entered into an agreement with the far-right Freedom and Democracy Party and the populist newcomers Motorists. However, the makeup of the government is still to be confirmed. We go live to our correspondent in Prague, Andrew Sweeney. Thanks for joining us. What can you tell us about how the new Czech government is going to be formed?
Well, the new coalition agreement means that Andrej Babiš's ANO party, with 80 members, is linked up with the far-right Freedom and Democracy Party, SPD, and the Motorists with 15 and 13 respectively. Now, that means that they have a coalition in the parliament, but it doesn't mean that they have a government. That's because now that these parties have an agreement in place, they now must nominate ministers to be approved by the Czech President Petr Pavel. Now, that process could take up until December, according to Babiš, who was also a previous Prime Minister up until 2021. A personality to note in this new parliament will be the proposed Speaker of the President of the Chamber of Deputies, Tomio Okamura. Born in Japan to a Czech mother, he has long been on the fringes of Czech politics, given his views on the EU and NATO, both of which he's called for referenda on leaving. He will now be one of the most senior people in senior politicians in the Czech Republic. Interesting to note as well, his brother is also an opposition member for the KDU party. So while the new coalition is certainly in place now, the search for the next Czech government will continue to be ongoing for a couple of months yet. Back to you.
Andrew Sweeney reporting for us live from Prague. Thank you very much. Turkish refineries have decreased their purchases of Russian oil due to U.S. sanctions, according to media reports. Since the outbreak of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Turkey has been the third biggest importer of Russian crude after China and India.
Another day, another lost customer. According to a Reuters report, Turkish refineries are finally ditching Russian crude.
Donald Trump asked countries like Bulgaria, like Slovakia, Hungary and Turkey to end reliance on Russian supply. It will take time, but we see the diversification has started.
Turkey saw its supply of Russian crude rise significantly after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Now, the risk of getting hit with secondary sanctions forced the two biggest refiners in the country, Azeri-owned Sokar and Turkish Tüpraş, to turn to alternative suppliers like Iraq or Kazakhstan.
Turkish refinery that you have mentioned started to import oil outside of Russia, and it is a changing behavior. And to make it a long-term commitment, we would need to see a full enforcement of U.S. sanctions.
Turkey is just another example of how impactful the U.S. sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil have been. Today, they have forced Lukoil to sell its international holdings and have called into question the supply to longtime Russian customers like Hungary. India, Russian crude purchaser number 2 in the world, has also started to slowly turn away from the commodity. Experts warn, however, that this trend may reverse if sanction enforcement is lacking.
We'll see how Americans behave if someone is breaking those sanctions regime, if they are imposing secondary sanctions. If they do so, this trend would be sustained. If not, the customers could go back to Russian supplies.
However, Turkish refiners are already saying that they won't move away from Russian crude entirely. Turkey is also a major consumer of Russian natural gas due to 2 pipelines connecting those countries. All in all, Turkey was the third largest importer of Russian fossil fuels in September, stuffing Kremlin's coffers with 2.6 billion euros.
But does Donald Trump's peace come at a cost? The U.S. president is now defending a series of new military actions in Venezuela, calling them part of a war on narco-terrorism. But some say his approach risks escalating conflicts abroad, even as he presents himself as the peacemaker president. Diana Skujins reports.
He calls himself the peace president.
Those are 8 of the 9 wars I solved.
But after fresh U.S. strikes of at least 9 vessels off of Venezuela's coast, killing over 3 dozen suspected drug smugglers, and what the Pentagon calls a war on narco-terrorism, critics say Donald Trump's peace comes with a cost. UN officials say the killings violate international law.
The Trump administration has secretly authorized the CIA to conduct covert actions in Venezuela.
Trump fired back.
No, this is about many things. This is a country that allowed their prisons to be emptied into our country.
In an interview with Norah O'Donnell of CBS News, Trump insists the U.S. isn't going to war, yet admits Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro may soon be gone.
On Venezuela in particular, are Maduro's days as president numbered?
I would say, yeah. I think so, yeah.
The commander-in-chief won't confirm reports of planned land strikes in Venezuela, even as nearly 10,000 U.S. warships and F-35s remain stationed in the Caribbean.
And this issue of potential land strikes in Venezuela, is that true?
I don't tell you that. I mean, I'm not saying it's true or untrue, but I wouldn't.
Why would we
I wouldn't
do
be
it?
inclined to say that I would do that, but because I don't talk to a reporter about whether or not I'm going to strike.
Maduro, wanted in the U.S. on drug charges and not recognized by most Western nations as a legitimate president, calls Trump's move a regime change in disguise, aimed at seizing Venezuelan oil. Human rights groups say at least 65 people have been killed since the U.S. offensive began in September. And now Trump is shifting his attention to Africa. He's ordered the Pentagon to prepare for potential military action in Nigeria. accusing the Nigerian government of allowing the killing of Christians.
They're killing the Christians and killing them in very large numbers. We're not going to allow that to happen.
My fellow Nigerians.
Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu claims Trump's comments distort reality. And here's the catch. Nigeria is the largest oil producer in Africa. Venezuela, one of the biggest in the Americas. So with the new U.S. deployments in the Caribbean and talk of strikes in Africa, is Trump's peace doctrine really about peace or more about oil? For TVP World, I'm Diana Skaya.
And that's all for Midday Report. Thank you for being with us and stay tuned for much more on TVP World. Goodbye.